For more information, please visit the Quanto Cancer Project website. Today, it is a pleasure to be joined by Dr. Paola Masuzzo, a data scientist and open science advocate at IGDOR, the Independent Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education, dedicated to improving the quality of science and science education and the quality of life for scientists, students, and their families. In brief, Paola is going to give us a seminar about open and inclusive science. So please do not forget that we have a question and answer box open to everyone. So please type your questions here throughout the talk and we will ask them at the end. You can also upvote and comment. So thank you so much, Paola, for joining us today. Now I'm not going to say that the floor is yours, but the screen is yours, Paola. Thank you so much.
All right, you should all be able to hear me now, and I will start by sharing my screen. And if something goes wrong at any moment, please interrupt me so that we can all get on track as fast as possible, but I think this should be now fine. I am very, very happy to be here. Before I start, I want to tell you that you can also follow this presentation along at this tiny URL, Open Lisboa. Of course, I would have very much preferred to be in Portugal, but you know, we need to deal with the situation. And actually looking back, at the beginning, I thought it was going to be a bit of a pity not to be able to come there and meet all of you. But maybe this time we can still get the most out of it and also spin a little bit the message that I had in mind, because these are a particularly special and challenging time for research and for researchers. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, it's mostly how I believe that we should start nurturing more slow, robust, responsible, and transparent science. The other title for this presentation could be stuff that I've learned on Twitter from very, very smart people, definitely smarter than me. So the first thing that I want to start with is open science. And just to make sure we are all on the same page, there is not a clear definition of open science, but this is definitely, I don't want to say a new method or perhaps a renewed method of conducting scientific research. Both in conducting, publishing, but also evaluating the research, open and participatory, with the idea in mind to increase cooperation and transparency at all research stages. So from the production of the scientific discourse to the dissemination. What's the advantage of open science? Ideally is that open science would lead to more robust scientific results, also to more fair, just and faster access to the scientific records for everybody, which in turn would mean a greater both economic and societal impact. Now, the other science, of course, it's the traditional one, which you might wonder, okay, what's the traditional one, the closed science? Well, let's say that with years, unfortunately, because of especially the rhetoric of research excellence, some things have shifted away from this cooperative and transparent way of conducting research, but I will get to that during this presentation. As I said before, we are living challenging times, and I believe all of you have witnessed what's been happening with the COVID-19 research and the dissemination of all the preliminary and non-preliminary scientific outputs. It seems like we are witnessing a real revolution in scientific publishing, where scientists have come to understand that we are in an emergency situation. We better get all on the same page, share our results as fast, as efficiently as we can. Of course, I also like to point out that this emergency open science, together with emergency open access, when all of a sudden we open all our results because we are in an emergency situation, more than a solution, it's more a symptom. And this is also something that I would like to go back in the course of this presentation. This is just a little hint to what will follow next. The other type of doing science, and this of course comes from the fact that I'm a data scientist, like Adriana was mentioning, and I have a PhD in bioinformatics, so I very much work with data. I keep working with data, and independently of a bit the discipline that we work in, we cannot pretend that these days science is not driven by data. So by the time passing by, we've gone from empirical to theoretical, passing through computational science, and now the e-science or science 2.0, like you see it called sometimes, the science that it's driven by data. Now, this does not come without challenges. First and foremost, we're producing a lot of data, but to make this data not only human readable and accessible, but also machine readable, so that it can constitute the substrate for knowledge discovery. This is a very challenging thing. The other fact is that, of course, the more data we produce, and the more diverse this data and the pipelines that we follow, computational and experimental, the harder it will be for our research to be reproducible. And at the same time, research assessment. And I will get to that into a moment. So it's true that these days, if we look at the data that we produce, it's obvious, even though sometimes we're still not fully understanding this, it's obvious that this type of research and research output cannot be trapped into a PDF, so into a format of scientific publishing that really belongs to the 17th century. Because I put here that, so what happens when you do your science, your research, you have your text, you have the data you've produced, you have your code, the version of your code, you even have the protocols you have used if you do experimental work, if you work in the life sciences, of course. But the science, at the very end, you need, of course, to communicate this to your peers. So what you do, you tell a story, and this is important, don't get me wrong, but this story just does a little bit of advertising, allow me the term. This story communicates to the scientific community that you have done your research, but there's much more behind that. The real science is actually a package of all of this. And going back to what I mentioned before, that reproducibility is a bit hard, of course, the more complex the scientific process becomes. The reproducibility spectrum, if you share at the very end of your research cycle only a PDF with the story, the chances that I will be able to reproduce your study are very low. On the other hand, if you share everything behind it, the chances increase, given some conditions that we will also look into. And just to make sure we understand each other, with reproducibility here, I mean that I take the same analysis and the same data, and I come up with the same results. This is really the minimum standard for a piece of research to be valid, which is, after all, the most important thing there is. I must say that there are a lot of positive signs towards a more transparent, reproducible, but also interactive way of publishing your research. And this is, for example, a very good news that came out of the eLife journal very recently, a new era of reproducible publishing, where ERA stands for executable research article. So you do have your article still published as a PDF with the story that, of course, you need to share with your readers and with the scientific community, but you can also accompany that piece of article with a reproducible article where you can actually mix together the code and the figures, for example, that you have produced in your manuscript, and you can re-execute it so that you can verify, you can learn, you can use it for educational purposes, indeed to also interact with the science, because science is dynamic. And one of the two things, one of the two outputs that you currently see published in eLife, it's from the reproducibility project of cancer biology from the Open Science Framework. And I invite you to have a look at it because it's really interesting. Of course, what also needs to shift it's research assessment. So with this, I mean to say that the scientific publishing, very slow, unfortunately, but is trying to keep up with the new ways that we use to conduct science. Research assessment seems to be much slower, unfortunately. This is a result that I took from a survey run last year in 2019 from the European University Association, which basically compiled a series of questions in trying to understand which metrics are used for research careers, especially with respect to the transition to open science and to this more participatory and transparent way of doing research. Unfortunately, what you can see here is that the first publication metric used for research career is still the journal impact factor. 75% of the surveyed institutions replied that that's the first thing they look at to assess the quality of research and thereof the quality of researchers that have conducted that research. Now, who knows me a little bit as a data science knows that there are two things really that I cannot understand. First is pie charts, but the other one is the impact factor. I still believe that it's really stupid and a pity that we are so much tied to a measurement that already from a statistical point of view doesn't mean too much. What I have taken here from the Wikipedia page of the journal impact factor is a distribution of the number of citations for Nature in blue and for +1 in orange. And you see that the distribution for Nature is very highly skewed to the right with few highly cited papers, which means if you go and take the average of these distributions, it's not reflective, of course, of the underlying distribution, and it will be bumped to 38 for Nature and only 3.1 for +1. These are a bit outdated numbers, so don't care too much about the real number of the impact factor. This is to give an idea that statistically speaking, that this measurement is very much flawed. On top of that, we should never forget that journal impact factor is a metric that works at a journal level, and it says very little, actually nothing, about the quality of article and of the research at the article level. So this is something that we still are too much tied to, or at least we pretend that we care so much. And unfortunately, it's something that we have kind of borrowed when we started talking about research excellence. Now, this is a very let's say, complicated topic, I find. I am myself trying to understand how did we start talking about research excellence in the past, so the history. And with this slide, I am just trying to tell you what is research excellence, even though I would very much like to hear your opinions, especially early career researchers' opinions on the matter. I have collected kind of a list of definitions that I found in literature from people who are much more expert than me in talking about this. Somebody said, well, research excellence is the holy grail of academic life. The moment you start your PhD, for example, your graduate studies will tell you need to show that you are excellent at your research, whatever that means. Cameron Neylon said that this is a word that we have defined at a certain point to avoid to have a much rather difficult conversation, a conversation about values. And this is something that I will go back to because I really believe that this is crucial, this is key to understand why we have come up with research excellence the way we have and all the consequences that come with this rhetoric. What is research excellence? It's also something that tells us about how important the science is, nothing about how important the science is, and everything about who decides. So a piece of research is excellent for whoever is looking at it, judging and evaluating it, but really tells nothing about really how important or how impactful the science is. Under its current form, research excellence is a very dangerous rhetoric that undermines the good foundations of scholarship, of good scholarship and good research. This is one of my favorite definitions or my favorite connotations around research excellence. And very recently, again, Neylon has published a very interesting article that I invite you all to read. Research excellence is a new colonial agenda. It does nothing but reinforcing systemic biases in power structures. It reduces diversities and it excludes many, many people, many participants from the process of scholarship. Because of this, the last point, you might already guess that research excellence, the way it is defined now, cannot stay in the same equation as open and transparent and participatory science and inclusive science. So what's the solution? Before I get to the solution, I'd like to tell you a little bit more with what I mean when I say that research excellence in its current form, it's a dangerous rhetoric. What comes with the research excellence, unfortunately, it's the the so-called cumulative advantage effect, also called Matthew effect. Basically, very simple put, this is an effect by which, of course, you have evaluation committees, funding committees, grant committees, they all come together and they need to choose with the rather scarce resources at hand, financially and mostly financially, of course, what are the researchers and the institutions that deserve to be rewarded. And unfortunately, what happens with the research excellence rhetoric is that as the time goes by, those who already have a lot become richer, and those who really don't have a lot become poorer. So it increases the stakes of the competition for resources, which you might already figure out, again, doesn't go really too well with all the inclusiveness and the open and inclusive science that we very much need in this society. Discourages also the publication and the pursuit of types of normal science, like replication studies. Why? Because they're not sexy enough, not shiny enough to be published, for example, in journals with high impact factor. Again, the same rhetoric. And creates a bias towards novel, positive, and sometimes even inflated results, which I will get back in a moment. Okay, we don't like research excellence, at least I'm going to say I don't like research excellence the way it is defined these days, or the way we have defined it for too long the past decades. If not excellence, then what? Ideally, in perhaps idealistic world, we would abandon metrics altogether. But this might not be realistic. It is true that being a scientist is also a job, and that the resources are scarce, and that we need to allocate them to the best people out there. This is also important. And to some extent, the semantics also matter, which means that politicians, policymakers, society, they do expect from scientists to be excellent. The money that the public fund and the tax money we do, society expects that the science we do is excellent science, and they have all the rights to expect so. So I believe that really what needs to happen is for us to redefine excellence. And this is really something that I believe will happen if we promote more and more the diffusion of open and participatory ways of doing science. First, we need to understand that excellence depends on context. So what research excellence means in Europe might not be the same that what it means in South America or in North America, for example. The other thing that is very important, and that's why I was very happy to give this webinar and have this conversation with you, is that we need to start talking about responsible science, not only excellent science, or maybe redefine excellence, because in terms of responsibility, if the way you conduct and you share your research is a responsible way, this gives you an extra point to become an excellent scientist. So we should promote reproducibility, integrity, transparency. We should also look at how a specific research group, for example, is handling issues of equity and social justice. What I believe needs to happen, it's a shift from an evaluation of outputs to an evaluation of practice. This goes a little bit back with what I said before. Science is dynamic. It can be trapped into a PDF and that's it. The fact that it changes, it's a cycle. I think what we need to start evaluating researchers by the way they conduct science, and not by the journals that they share or they get to publish their science into. So the first thing that I would like to talk about, and I really believe that needs to be put at the organization level much more than what it is these days, is that all languages matter. We have decided at a certain point that the lingua franca of science is English. This is of course important. If I were to be talking in Italian now with an audience most likely by majority Portuguese, we wouldn't understand each other. at least not properly. And it's okay to have a common and unified way of communicating. Of course, this comes with a few risks that we need to be aware of and that I believe people have not talked about enough in the last years. First, the overrepresentation of positive or statistically significant results. Again, why is that? Because of the rhetoric of excellence. If you do excellent science, it means you publish in high impact factor journals, and usually these high impact factor journals are in English, full stop. The fact that we publish in English, it means that we might overlook at information very specific on local species, on ecosystems, on phenomena. In Portuguese, if we look in Portugal, in Italy, in Italian, if we look in Italy, and so on and so forth. And then there is a real knowledge transfer problem, because if all the science that we produce is in English, the local practitioners, the policymakers, or the public at large, society that wants to have access, but not only to have access, but also understand and use this knowledge, basically cannot use it. They have all the right to do so, but there is real limitation in accessing and making use of this knowledge. So one of the initiatives that I believe needs to be pushed forward is the Helsinki Initiative on Multilingualism. This is a difficult word, multilingualism. So they have launched a campaign. If you're on Twitter, you can follow it up with the hashtag in all languages. Basically, it's an initiative that tries to promote the dissemination of research results for the full benefit of society. So a message that I hope to give you towards the course of this webinar is that science does not belong within the walls of university. That's where it's produced, and that's fine. Science belongs to society. It needs to be for the benefit of society. Otherwise, there's no point in what you're doing. The other thing that we need to protect the national infrastructures for research that it's locally relevant. It's okay for science to look at global goals, to have a global benefits on society, but there should be a compromise with research that it's done for local entities, local communities that are still very much important. And then again, because this needs to be assessed, and at the end of the day, we all need to be evaluated and assessed, we need to promote language diversity in assessment, evaluation, and funding systems. For example, we need to keep in mind that the time and the resources, also financially sometimes, for people and researchers that do not speak English as a first language are higher for native English speakers. So the money that we spend for translations, or even the learning time, that it's higher for non-native English speakers. So these are all things that we need to keep into account. The other thing is that we need to tell it like it is. As I said before, it's okay that we do science and that we write a story in a research article, but there has been way too much pressure to provide what I call clean narratives. Science is messy. I have done science, I still do science, and I know, and I'm very much sure that everybody agrees with me, saying that at a certain point your experiment doesn't produce what you were expecting, your hypothesis you don't know, you have inconclusive results and you don't know if you can accept it or reject it. So we need transparency in reporting limitations and inconclusive results. What I pasted here for you, it's a snippet from this beautiful book from Stuart Ritchie, Exposing Fraud, Bias, Negligence, and Hype in Science, where basically says that if you start because of a publication bias, we already have very few positive results, the white one that get published, very few negative results that get published. Then we have things like outcome switching and spins, where sometimes negative results are spun into positive results. And then we also, on top of that, have the citation bias, which means that at the end, almost all you can see are the positive results. But there is a lot of knowledge in the negative results. Maybe we should start calling this something else. So what I write here is that we need to talk about fail tales. I am personally developing a curriculum, a personal resume of mine, where I just list all the failures I've encountered in life and what I've done to overcome them. We need to talk about these fail tales, and maybe even better, we need to redefine a failure. And we need to start telling our new generation of scientists that science is built towards success as much as failure. This is important. According, well, in line a little bit with this, it's the other thing that unfortunately we still don't talk enough about. The fact that we need a research culture that is kinder. It's okay to be human. That's why it's okay to talk about failures. That's why it should be okay to also publish inconclusive or negative results. And yet, if you look at this survey that was run for the Wellcome Trust earlier this year, I believe February or March 2020, what do researchers think about the culture they work in? 78% of the researchers think that the environment they work in, unfortunately, it's unkind and aggressive because of the competition level that they work in. This is a danger. This is a danger, of course, for the quality of science, but it's first and foremost a danger for researchers, and especially early career researchers. The other thing that I want to underline here is that we do not only need a shift in the research culture, because, I mean, everybody can agree that we need to have a kinder research culture. It's also, if we want to regain the dialogue with society, this dialogue that is perhaps dead, we need to have a kinder research culture to build stronger and deeper support for research. In this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen this more than ever before, I believe, or at least that I can recall of. People will trust a science that is not only competent, but also kind. I have listed there a very interesting article, People Will Not Trust Unkind Science, an opinion published in Nature, where basically people have been surveyed, and to the question, why don't you trust science? It's not a matter of competence. Most likely they do believe that science is done properly and skilled, but the public, the society, really is doubts that scientists have society's best interest at heart. So if we do not align at this interest, if we do not take science and put it back there where it belongs, to the heart of society, we will always have this gap between science and society. And this is definitely not good. So one of the ways we can renew this dialogue is by building a kinder research culture where we let society know that, yeah, we do science because we believe it should benefit the society, and not because we need to publish in an high impact factor journal. Speaking of a kinder research culture, I want to just promote here a little bit, simply because I really believe in this, and I love what Zoe is doing, the 100 Voices. This is a project that she has launched, where over in a journey over 100 days, 100 researchers will share their 100 mental health journeys. The voices of academia, because if it's true that we want to improve the conditions, the mental health and the wellness in academia, then researchers need to be given a voice. And the more we talk about it, the less of a taboo it will become, and the swifter, hopefully, we will shift towards something more positive. Another very difficult argument that we haven't had enough, I believe, it's the diversion, equity, and inclusion one. This is a rather difficult argument for me as well. It's sometimes a bit painful to stop and think and talk about these things, but I believe it's important. There is no open science without inclusive science. Last year in September, I was in Portugal, in Porto, for the Open Science Fair, and there I started talking about from open science to inclusive science. This year I have realized by reading, researching, and especially by listening to the voices that matter, to the voices that we should all be listening to, that there is no such a transition. We can't talk about open science, we can't talk about just science if we don't think about equity, inclusion, and diversity. There cannot be an afterthought, there needs to be at the foundation of what we are trying to build. And this is everybody's responsibility. How come that we are not doing that great then? Of course, this very much depends on local context, on discipline, on research background. But still, why are we not doing that much? Are we not doing that well? Because we go too fast. Researchers are too busy to inform themselves, too busy to look up, too busy to imagine themselves in others' shoes. because either they are protected by their privilege, which is fine, but because they have so much other stuff to do, and they have so many demanding workloads, that they basically cannot afford to waste, to invest their time into these subjects. But there is much more than being a scientist than just doing science. So what's the solution here again? And I'm giving you another couple of references that I hope you will read and try to let them sink into you, is that we need to promote slower science. Because the academic culture of working harder and therefore longer, it's already a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue in itself. It does not take into account people with caring responsibilities, people with mental and or physical limitations. So we need to start, as I said before, promoting science that it's robust, that it's slow, and that assess and values the outputs as well as the practice and also the responsibility of conducting science. So to recap this part of the message that I hope will make you think and maybe open a discussion, a conversation, is that it's time, I really believe we need to start valuing impact and not impact factors. If we really want to talk about a factor, I believe this should be the human factor. We need to start realizing that exploitation and pressure are not always only dangerous for scientists, but they also do not lead to the best science. We need to also start telling like it is. Science is messy. And we need to start promoting things like mentorship, mentoring, leadership, support for mental health. So as somebody, again, way smarter than me said, if our values don't drive our metrics will distort our values. So every institution, for example, if you have signed the DORA, the Declaration for the Open Research Evaluation, we need to start putting this declaration in place. We need to start looking at human metrics so that these metrics are in line with our values. And this is the responsibility of every researcher, but especially at every researcher, every research institute, evaluation committee, and grant committee. And I also would like to point you out to this very nice project around the human metrics, but even though it's especially for the social sciences, I really believe that in the biomedical, in the life sciences field, we're still behind in this respect, because there the perhaps competition is higher, resources are even more scarce, and this rhetoric of research excellence has been living on for far too long. There are initiatives out there that show that people are going to the right direction. So with this, I conclude the first message, and now I open with another question. The question is, okay, do you think that open science is the solution to everything? The little spoiler alert here is that no, it's not the solution to everything. And I would like to build to this answer by looking at the rise of preprints. I hope you all know what a preprint is. If not, just to recall, it's a form, it's the piece of the manuscript that you have finished, but you have not submitted yet to a journal for peer review. So before it's peer review, you submit it to a preprint server. You can post it, you have a DOI, and you can start collecting feedback from the community openly on the platform. And as you can see here, since the COVID-19 pandemic started, we have seen a rise in preprints. This is the amount of preprints per week. I put you here the data source. This is updated either weekly or bi-weekly, I believe. And this is colored by the preprint server. So it seems like we're learning. Things are moving the right direction. We have results, we disseminate them fast because the public, the policymakers, whatever, they need to have access to it. And I went, as a curiosity, I went to look at the pandemic of, well, the epidemiological outbreak of SARS in Hong Kong and Toronto in 2003. And this very nice study shows that 93% of the papers published at that time, they were only published after the epidemic period had ended, which seems kind of a missed opportunity to create knowledge and act fast. towards something that was still considered a major threat to the public health. So we are learning. We are seeing a revolution in scientific publishing. What's the catch? The catch is that open science is not responsible science by default. You can't just put everything out there on the web and then expect people to use it correctly, expect people to be able to review it, to screen for faulty science, and expect people to make informed decisions based on, for example, these open preprints. For example, what has been observed is that the median time of acceptance from the time of submission to acceptance in journal of COVID-19 article has been reduced to less than 7 days. 60% of the articles accepted in journals around COVID research, COVID-19, they have been accepted within 7 days, which is not bad because the peer review process is sometimes very slow, and it's okay to speed it up. Some journals have their fast track, but some other journals, they also accept perspective and hypothesis and review articles without additional review, which of course it's a danger, let's say. And this is also why the Retraction Watch project, for example, has started a dedicated database of retracted COVID-19 papers, which unfortunately seems to be growing by week. Why is that? I will get to that in a second, but first I want to do a comparison with the traditional model. Because people at this stage says, okay, you see them preprints are wrong, they're bad, because you can use them to disseminate faulty science, and people will take this science, they will talk about it, and they will make decisions with it. True, but the traditional model, usually you have your manuscript, you send it to a journal, and you expect the review back. If you're lucky, after months. Sometimes I had to wait for almost a year for my peer review to be completed once. What's in this black box? You don't know. There is 2, 3 reviewers, anonymous. It's a rather opaque process. And sometimes there are also some errors that are not detected by the peer review system. And this can only be corrected, even retracted after months or even years. So all in all, this process is not much better than the open and fast sharing of scientific results. If you look at what has happened with the COVID-19, for example, you must have seen this article, which of course has been withdrawn the moment it was posted in February. After 48 hours, there was so much comments and feedback from the community that this article was just not okay. After not even 48 hours later, the preprint was retracted, was withdrawn. So I consider this all in all still a winning. Because basically what it's showing us is that if you want science that cannot be questioned, then it's not science that you want. The scientific discourse, the scientific production first and the discourse later is not linear, and we need to start making peace with this fact. So what is that we need? And I will build it towards the end of this presentation. We need science that it's open, but that it's also responsible. Opening up everything is not gonna make science responsible by default. We need to start talking about data sharing, also pre-publication. It's important, for example, in the article in the Lancet that was retracted on the studies of the COVID-19 patients, if the data there were shared at the submission system, all of this would not happen. So the data set was questionable. Later on, it was looked at. We also need a transparent and open peer review, because if we can, the fact that the peer review, all the knowledge that we create remains closed. Basically, this is bad, because it's not only knowledge that we waste and knowledge that actually contributes to the scientific discourse, but it's also that the whole process stays opaque, and we cannot use the peer review comments and the feedback to also try to understand better the science and the quality of the science. And we need to start talking about developing new practices to help with responsible reporting and communication. For example, I believe it's very important that all the preprint servers have this big disclaimer that say that these articles should not be covered too much in the news, or if they do, they should be covered in the news stating that they cannot be used as a guide for health-related behavior. They cannot be used as established and peer-reviewed information. This is important. We also need to start working on developing more and more community efforts. And in this sense, I would like, for example, to highlight to you the pre-lights, which is a print highlights platform where the biological community selects some preprints that thinks are of relevance, and they open them there for open conversation and discussion. Or, for example, the preview project that has now joined, let's say, joint efforts with the Outbreak Science, and they have opened an Outbreak Science rapid preview, which is still beta, but you can already look at it. Basically, it's a platform where you have a list of outbreaks, and one of these is, of course, COVID-19, and you can see there, you can start journal clubs where you can review these preprints, and you collect as much community feedback as possible, and you can ask for a specific preprint to be reviewed by a specific user, for example, depending on their expertise and what they can put, what they can offer to the discourse, to the scientific dialogue. We also needed to start thinking more about regaining the dialogue with the citizens and with practitioners. For example, I find this platform on scientific reference to reliable information on climate change really nice. We could start, I don't know if it exists, but we could start something like this for common life sciences, medicine facts. You go there, you look at some claim, and then you have a bunch of people, of course, expert on climate change, they know what they're doing, and they mark them as correct or incorrect. But it's not only that, or for example, lacks context, lacks background. They give you a context. So you go there, you want to inform yourself on climate change, you have a look at the specific claim, and if it's incorrect, if the verdict is incorrect, you can see why is that, and you can cross-relate it with other claims. Something like this, for example, around the COVID-19 would be super useful. So I move towards the end, and I believe I am right on time. I tried to put all of this together in a slide as a take-home message, even though I'm already at home, and most likely you are as well. So first we need to start recognizing that the way we do science these days has changed, that we produce much more than a PDF, and that there is way more than a paper when we talk about units of scientific knowledge. So we also should start shifting research assessment towards everything that we produce and not just the final PDF. We need to start redefining research excellence towards values, leadership, mental health, support, diversity work. These are all human things that we need to start not only talking more, even though I believe it's already a first step, we need to start having them in guidelines. We need to start having them in protocols, in research evaluation forms and things like that. We need to start redefining failure, nurturing slower and responsible science. As I said before, shift the focus from the outputs to the practice. And I really think it's important that we start investing in tools, services, and community-driven initiatives. Sometimes people ask me, how do we do this? The resources are very scarce. People that know me also know that I have a little bit of a radical approach in this sense. If we would cut all our subscription cost to all of those publishing companies out there, we would save a lot of budget every year, and all of that could really be invested into making the whole process of science much more reliable, much more transparent. and build community efforts that will take science back to where it belongs, which at the end it's the heart of society and outside of our research institutions. And I believe with this I am through, and I hope there are questions and discussion. Thank you.